Speaking of staying in your own lane, so to speak, or even looking at the generation, comparing them to the generation before them. Let's go back to the life of Dr. Will Johnson. How was it for you in college? And more important, and also, how did you decide to pursue a degree in education and so forth? How did Will Johnson end up here where you are today?
That's a great question. Uh, I think I ended up here. Let me start with sort of the end.
Uh-huh.
I ended up here because I had a great time in college.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed the college. I met so many wonderful people, both in terms of my peers and all of those adults who
Yeah.
mentored me and guided me along the way. So that's certainly one of the reasons why I ended up here. I
Mm-hmm.
did go to college, though. I've always been a very big sports fan, and
Uh-huh.
I've always had a strong interest in, physiology, the medical and health professions.
Yep. Yep.
So I went to college initially as a athletic training major,
Mm.
sports science major.
Yep.
And I did 2 semesters of sports sciences, and I did okay, but not great.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely could have done better if I put a little bit more time into it.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always been one who wants to be involved and engaged in lots of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly that was an aha moment that I had early on in my college experience that says, well, if you're going to stick with this, Will, you're not going to be able to do a lot of other things.
Right.
I've also been that person who loves school.
Mm-hmm.
We've all probably heard of the kid or have dealt with those children ourselves. I know that I have. With the kid who just doesn't like to go to school.
So, right. Right.
I've always loved school. I've always loved engaging with my teachers. Now, my teachers, I think of many of them off the top of my head, particularly in the 4th and 5th grade, Mr. Latanzio and Miss Tony. I mean, they were really hard on Will Johnson for all the best reasons,
That's
right?
right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Because they saw at times that I wasn't working to my ability or doing all the things that I needed to be doing. So they stayed on my case. But it was probably at those points in time that I really began to form this passion
Mm-hmm.
for education.
Yeah.
Again, I think about my parents. I mentioned them early on, and sort of how they I don't think they really ever had to push my sister and I to love school. I think some of it was just kind of natural. We just
Uh-huh.
loved everything that school, kind of brought to us.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some other people, who are very influential, in our lives or in my life, I should say, who kind of led me down this path. I think of uh, Barbara Murphy. Barbara Murphy was a licensed home daycare provider who lived on our street. And she is the person who my parents entrusted
Mm-hmm.
to watch my sister and I before and after school, make
Yeah.
sure we got on the bus, make sure we got off the bus. Also spent an incredible amount of time with her during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mrs. Murphy is the one who would, you know, take us to parks, take us to museums, um, took us to vacation Bible club,
Mm-hmm.
Bible school, Bible
Yeah.
camp, I
Yeah.
should say, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
During the summer, and just exposed us to a great number of things. That's the first time Mrs. Murphy introduced me to Booker T. Washington.
Oh,
The
nice.
first time I saw, the autobiography of Malcolm X was on a shelf at her house.
Oh.
So, so it was as many of those things and many of those people who kind of led me to be where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, do you find that as an educated man of color, that in earlier we were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth. Our country, was going through a lot of turmoil, particularly in the last 4 years of the Trump administration. Now that we have a new president, certainly there is hope, right? And then as someone who comes from another country, namely Haiti, I've always looked at America as being the land of opportunity, of course, and also America as the country that has so much potential. I mean, to where the desire to do the right thing is always there, but we also have a history, right, of brutality, of racism, and of abdicating and slavery and so forth and so on.
It's in our roots.
It's in our roots, right? But the hope, that sense of all men are created equal, concept that even though we kind of defy the test in so many ways, but there are ways also that we can uplift that not so much to uplift it, to put it up as a model that as something we should aspire to.
Yeah, right? In terms of ideas, absolutely.
In terms of ideals, right? So what does that mean for you, right? Has it been? So do you? How do we embrace being American? I know you embrace being American, but you see my question. How is that in terms of everything else? How do you maintain that sense of being an American, the sense of being a black man, sense of being an educated, productive man in this society?
Yeah, so I guess in some respects, I am an American because I was born here.
Yes.
I am an American because there are certain freedoms that I should be, in essence, entitled to, right?
Yes.
But to your point, when we look at things from a historical perspective, which I think as a country we've been doing a lot of learning and soul searching and reflecting on in recent years to help us understand kind of how do we arrive at this point? How do we get from here to there?
Right.
It's sort of taught us, okay, so these are the roots, right? of in the origins of this country's being or blossoming or burgeoning, so to speak, right? Whether you're looking at, the Puritans or the pilgrims coming over here from England, escaping persecution, or fast forwarding to the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade, or looking at the American Revolution and every other revolution or conflict that has taken place since then. It's usually because of a battle of ideas, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And that lives true to this very day. And as we talk about those things that we do embrace as a country that are part of the fabric of who we are, and how it does lead to some of this divisiveness that we see as a country, I think we, at least I should say, have grown to understand that, in a certain way, appreciate it, not necessarily in the, jovial sense of doing jumping jacks because, black men like me were held in, captivity for hundreds of years. But I do it in terms of looking at the progress that we have made as a society, how even if we go back to, I will say, our parents' generation, right? Or their parents' generation, where, we weren't considered full people. Right? We didn't have the rights of full people. And again, I can sit in a place now where I have the privilege of at least believing that I do have this and have acted on those privileges. But we also see at the same times where, people are being in the most inhumane sorts of ways. We've seen the acts of violence that have, triggered mass protests. And I know you mentioned, just the last 4 years, but, I'd be remiss to say that even as we look back on, the presidency of the first Black president of this country, there were these same incidents of violence that were taking place within his administration.
Absolutely.
So I'm not a firm believer, so to speak, that it's a matter of who's in the White House that's going to determine how the people outside of it behave.
Right.
One thing to, in some way, embolden or support those individuals who are doing wrong, which I think is a criticism that we have of the current president in the current administration. But these sort of things have always been there. They've always taken place. And as much as we want them to end, unfortunately, they're probably going to be a part of who we are for many years and time to come.
Absolutely.